All right, good morning. Thank you, Representative Hall, for having us here, and thank you, committee, for hearing us. My name is Amber Mae Peterson. I am the owner and operator of the Fishmonger's Wife in Muskegon, Michigan. It is a fresh and smoked fish market. I got into the fisheries business when I married my husband, Eric Peterson, who is the fourth generation of Peterson Fisheries in Muskegon, Michigan. Eric's family has been fishing the Great Lakes since 1927. So we're here today on behalf of the Michigan Fish Producers Association. The MFPA represents our 13 full-time commercial fisheries. I know last week you heard testimony that said there was more than 13 commercial fisheries. There's 13 full-time people that are income is pretty much 100% commercial fishing. There are some others who are more part-time, okay? But if you look at your map that you have in front of you, that indicates where all the commercial fishing is happening for state licensed commercial fishers. So you'll see down in southern Lake Michigan, Peterson's, that's us. And then moving northward is Fishtown and Leland. They were established in 1850. And then go up to Big Stone Bay. Big Stone Bay has 2 licenses that they do fish on Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, but their main headquarters is in Mackinac City, and they run a very large processing facility there too. So, and then going up into the UP, you have some very well-established families up there. You have the Rulu brothers, who have been there since 1823. I think that almost qualifies them as perhaps the oldest continuous family-owned business in Michigan. I'm not sure. But yeah, they've been there for a long time. So, and then in Marquette, you have the Till family, excuse me. And then you have the Van Landshut family in Munising. Both have great heritage in the fishing industry. And then moving down along Lake Huron, you have Spalding and Gauthier. That fishery was recently bought in the last 6, 7, 8 years. So it's no longer Spalding and Gauthier, but it does have new operators, but they've been around for quite some time. So, and then you get down into the Saginaw Bay and lower Lake Huron area. So you have Seraphin Fisheries. We consider Dana to be our newest fisher. He's only been in the business since 1990. And then White's, they've been there since 1980. Lentz Fishery has been there since the 1900s. The Hamel family, 1900s. Bayport, 1895. And then you get down into Lake Erie, and the Blair family is down there. Excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous. And so as you can see, most of our families and our businesses have been around for many generations fishing. All of the knowledge that we have has been passed down from generation to generation. Our equipment, our property, our boats, all of that is investments that the family has made over the years, and typically it's inherited down from generation to generation. So, so looking at this map, I mean, we have a rich history of what the fish are doing in these areas, because part of our business is that we want to pay attention to the fish movement and what we're catching in our catch records, because that's what we do. Okay, and so there's some particular areas that we're really starting to see some problems with. Down in Muskegon and Leland, we're starting to see a lot more lake trout move in to our whitefish nets. We're getting to the point now where we're seeing half and half for us in Muskegon, if not 3/4 to 1/4. Leland is really, really suffering right now. They are seeing 90% lake trout, 80% lake trout in their nets. And the problem with that for us is lake trout and whitefish don't coexist together. When the lake trout move in, they push out the whitefish. And so it used to be historically commercial fishermen would then just start catching lake trout, and we would sell lake trout. And then the balance would continue, and the lake trout would go away and the whitefish, and we'd go back and forth, but we can't do that anymore. So as we're seeing the lake trout population increase, it's pushing out the whitefish, and this is hurting us a lot. So over in Saginaw Bay, there's been, I know you heard just some great testimony about what's going on in the Saginaw Bay. The commercial fisherman's standpoint of what's going on in Saginaw Bay is actually that the perch population would do a lot better if you took out some of the walleye. I mean, because walleye eat perch. That's part of their diet. So they're in the bay hunting, and you've stocked the bay, and now they're doing what fish do. They're hunting and eating other fish. And we see for fisheries management, and I'm going to use Canada just as an example for here, for the Bay Area, but when Canada and Lake Erie sees, a decrease in their perch population, they increase the commercial harvest of walleye to balance it out, and vice versa. There'll be some years where there's a lot of perch quota and not a lot of walleye quota because they're trying to maintain that balance. So part of the commercial fishermen's argument for Saginaw Bay is, well, you just have too many walleye. Take some of those out and you'll see perch again. You need to create a balance there. And the dynamics of the bay have changed, and the fact that an invasive species has come in, which is that quagga and zebra mussel, and it's made the water clearer. We have seen this across all the Great Lakes. But in that clear water, that makes optimal hunting now, because you can see for much, much farther. So walleye, I mean, it's wide open space, and it's all clear, and they can just hunt, and find perch. On top of that, the fish actually, well, frankly, they can see your gear now too. And so, they're trying to avoid you. So there's other issues going on just besides commercial fishing in the bay. I don't think commercial fishing is your problem in the bay. I think you're out of balance is what your problem is. And we have a change to the environment, and we're not adjusting to that. We're not adapting. So that's in Saginaw Bay, that's the commercial fisherman's standpoint. So, same thing we're seeing over in Leland and Muskegon area. So Lake Michigan, northern Lake Michigan, lake trout are coming in because they're doing what they're doing. They're hunting. And the lake trout right now have moved inshore because they're feasting on gobies. They love them. The gobies are all inshore. From a standpoint, this is a great thing for our fishery because gobies are an invasive that we don't desire. So cool, lake trout, gobble them up. But they're also pushing out the whitefish. Okay, so now we have to talk about how do we make a balance. So, sorry, I just had to talk about that because it was on me. I got a little bit sidetracked. I apologize.
That's okay. You made a comment you were nervous. You shouldn't be nervous.
Okay.
You know way more about fish than anybody in this committee does.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you being here and educating us.
Thank you very much. So getting back to the beginning, though, listening to testimony, if I was standing on your side, I would think that commercial fishermen are probably the sneakiest, most criminal people out there, and that we just must be dying to go out and set our nets and take everything we can get and make a quick buck and go home and, I don't know, drink a six-pack or something. And that's the farthest thing from the truth of what we do. And this is why. Okay, in the 1960s, or in the 1950s, at our peak, at our heyday, there was like 1,900 commercial fishermen, and we held the power at that time. Commercial fishermen, we ruled. And then things changed on us very quickly. Sea lamprey came in and wiped out the lake trout. The state decided to create a recreational fishery, and like that, we were reduced by 95%. We saw all of our friends go out of business. We saw everybody, we saw everything we knew go away. Okay, so now the people that are left, the 13 people on this piece of paper, I mean, we're the people who, like, this is it. Like, we know how to do this. This is about the only thing we need to know how to do. And if we're in Lansing telling you that there's a problem, it's because we've got generations of family history telling you there's a problem. And we're really worried about the fishery because we've already lived through this once. And we've seen all the tales and all the signs. And we're trying to get your attention and say, listen, there's a problem going on out there. And we know it because our livelihood depends on us going out continuously and catching fish and bringing them back in. And we do that no matter what the weather is. That's what we do. We also don't have a desire, though, to be the person that catches the last fish in the lake. We know that. We lived through that. We know that it's no good on the other side of that. But when we're here saying things like, there's too much lake trout, it's pushing out the whitefish, there's too much walleye, it's pushing out the perch, it's because we've seen this before and we know how this story ends. And so we're trying to tell everybody, listen, we got to do something to make the balance work here. So, I mean, by no means am I dismissing the recreational sport fishery. We know the economic value of the sport fishery, for sure. Just by the amount of people in this room sitting behind me to support, you know, I mean, we're outnumbered 1 to 1,000 probably. But that doesn't mean that the service we provide to the general public still shouldn't be valued. And what we provide is fish from the Great Lakes to somebody who doesn't want to or have the means to go out into the lakes and get their fish. That's what we do. If I have a freezer full of fish at the end of the season, I don't have a business anymore. My job is to distribute that fish to the public. Eric's family has been in Muskegon since 1927, and they never really had a direct sales retail market. They've always been selling to Chicago or to Leland or Mackinac City. They never really had a presence in the community. And then I started selling at our local farmers market. And we had huge success there. And then enough that we could open a brick and mortar building. So now I operate farmers market stalls and our brick and mortar location. The number one question that a tourist asks that comes to Muskegon is, what's the local fish? And that's what they want. There's this expectation when you come to Michigan or you're in a lakeshore community that you're going to eat the local fish. I mean, that's there in everybody's mind, and you may not realize it or not, but when you look at a menu, you know, the first thing you're going to say is, hey, what's local here? What's caught here? What's out of the Great Lakes? You know, and so as commercial fishermen, our job is to help fill that gap. In my lifetime, in my children's lifetime, commercial fishing will never reach its heyday of 1,900 people again. That's not possible, and that's not what we're asking for. What we're saying is that for the 13 people left, let us provide some variety to our community. Let us keep doing what we're doing, and let us have a spot at the table when we talk about laws and regulations, because we have generations of history and we know what's going on. So, and we're not interested in putting ourselves out of business. We're not interested in decimating the fish species, but we would like to be treated as professionals and have some input. You know, one last thing that's sticking with me, I'm sorry, that just kind of makes me stew a little bit. It's the abandoned gear thing. A trap net. I mean, first of all, we don't, as state licensed fishers, we don't have gill nets anymore. They were taken, we lost them in 1976, 67? Yeah.
In late 70s.
Late 70s.
Late 70s, large mesh gill nets were taken away.
Okay.
We do have the right to fish small mesh gill nets for chubs, but the chub fishery has went downhill, and we have not fished ourselves for chubs in the last 10 years.
Okay. So there's 2 fishermen that can fish for chubs. Us and Muskegon. Oh, excuse me, 3. Us and Muskegon, our retired neighbor who hasn't fished in 10 years, and Fishtown can also fish for chubs, and none of us have set those nets in a long time, 8 years, okay? So we're all using live trap nets. These nets are huge, okay? The pot of a trap net is about as big as your chairs. I mean, they're big. I'm trying to give you some scale, and I'm not being very efficient with that, but they're huge. They're anchored to the bottom of the lake. It takes a Lake Superior storm blowing for 4 days to make one of these nets come up. The other thing about these nets is the cost of a net is $8,000 to $12,000 per net. There are 2 people left that make these nets. There's a waiting list of about 6 months long to get a net made. If you lose a net in the lake from carelessness, you could be out of business. I mean, so it doesn't make financial sense for us to take and throw away generations of family investment with carelessness. Now, there are people who do this. There was one net lost in Lake Michigan from a state licensed commercial fisher. I believe it was 7 years ago because I just opened up my store. So 7 years ago. His net got tangled up with a bunch of tribal fishermen's nets. It happened. It was a big deal to get it taken out. Our boat actually went out to see if we could try to recover it. It broke our boat, you know, but we tried because we're aware of the fact that this is a hazard. We don't want this to happen either. But I feel like it's being implied that there's all these nets floating around in the Great Lakes and that we're a huge hazard. No, that's money floating around out there. I mean, would you let a $10,000 suitcase float around in the lake and not go get it? No, absolutely not. So, I mean, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. Representative Cambenzi, Tills up in Marquette. They had a storm on Lake Superior, that big one you had a couple of years ago. It was like three really bad days. And they had one of their nets that was literally ripped apart. I mean, that's how fierce the storm was. It ripped apart. They went out and recovered their pieces. I think maybe there's one piece that they still haven't found. But just recovering the pieces of the net saves you money. I mean, it's a money issue for us. These weren't gifted to us. This is our business. So, okay, hit me with questions. I'm very passionate
yes.
about this. I could talk for another 20 minutes.
I can tell you are, and we appreciate that. Representative Sowerby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your testimony today. So what is it your industry would feel with the loss of the ability to commercially fish the yellow perch?
Yellow perch, the loss of yellow perch in Saginaw Bay is like 33% of their catch. The DNR testified to that last week. A loss of a third of your business to a corporation puts it under. More or less to a small family-owned business, losing a third, I mean, that's the end. I don't even know how you would begin to recover from that. I don't know what happened if I lost a third of my business. In Muskegon, we can't keep perch, but for Saginaw Bay, losing a third of your catch, I mean, and just having it gone, taken away, I mean, it's not even because of Mother Nature, all these things that we know happen as part of being commercial fishermen. It's because it was just taken away. So.
Very good. Any other questions at this point? Yes, Representative Cambenzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. More just a comment. I'm really glad you kind of explained more of a total picture of what's going on, at least in the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that's happening, at least north of my district, up in the Keweenaw Bay area, is you know, the stamp sands that have been washing into the lake and covering the spawning beds for the whitefish.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we know right now could be taking out 25% of the whitefish. And, you know, what happens, like you explained, the lake trout move in, you know, and all of a sudden you're catching a bycatch in the nets and everything else. So I think there's a much larger story to kind of unfold. And I'm worried at this point that our commercial fishing families and operators haven't been at the table up to this point to kind of negotiate on what this is going to look like going forward. So that would be my hope. I know that we're probably not going to vote on this before we break, but I do think it would benefit everyone if you are at the table working on this with us and bringing that information and that history and that knowledge, because I think a lot of people simply don't realize a lot of the other contributors to what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I think I can announce something that will help a little bit along those lines. As the representatives indicated, it's not going to be physically possible to finish these hearings before we go on a recess for at least 3 weeks. What I'm going to be doing after today's session is putting a work group together, because I think that's exactly what we need to do, is make sure the relevant parties have a chance to talk to each other. So going forward, if anybody has a group or a person that they think would be useful to be on a work group, if you can contact Senator Goshkin in my office, we'll put that work group together, and hopefully we can make some progress this summer, at least in letting everybody air their concerns. Okay. Representative Sowerby has a question.
One last question. So what is the regulations on the other side of Lake Michigan in, say, Wisconsin, as compared to the regulations here in Michigan and what's proposed for Lake Michigan fisheries, affecting your business versus what is happening in Lake Huron on the Michigan side versus what the Canadian regulations are doing and allowing? what are the disparities or similarities, and how is that affecting the commercial fisheries here in Michigan?
Sure. So I'll do Wisconsin first. So Wisconsin actually still allows the use of gill nets in their fishery. Last year there was a lot of movement to allow commercial take of lake trout in Lake Michigan. That ultimately didn't happen. Instead, Wisconsin just didn't plant more lake trout. So they kind of held back, so to help reduce their numbers. Lake Superior, Wisconsin can take lake trout. So, and then Green Bay, Wisconsin has a yellow perch fishery. So that's kind of Michigan. We're a little bit closer with the exception of being the type of gear. So Lake Huron is different. So Lake Huron, Michigan side, you get yellow perch within Saginaw Bay. Okay. And then once you're out of the bay and you're on Lake Huron, you're a whitefish fishery. Across the lake in Canada, they have a lake trout, walleye, and yellow perch fishery that does catch and ships right back to Michigan. So I believe the lake trout number, and if anybody wants these numbers, we'll get them to you. But it was around 300,000 pounds of lake trout was coming out of Lake Huron, the Canadian side. Oh, I don't want to tell you the perch and walleye because I'll mess that number up, but it's significant, more than what we can take. So, yeah, thank you.